The agenda this week debated transit fare evasion and considered the future of American power. The Agenda's Week in Review begins with, of course, the public health response to COVID-19. Can I just do a follow-up on three different terms that we hear all the time, and you'll tell us the distinction here. Isolation, quarantine, social distancing. What's the difference?
So isolation, we're talking about people self-isolating, staying at home to try to prevent spread. Quarantine is a different sort of issue. Quarantine is something where we're talking about somebody who doesn't actually have the disease, and we're trying to prevent further infiltration, if you will, of the disease into a community.
And that's sort of an order. Quarantine is an order?
It is. It is. It's a very age-old practice from a very, very long time ago as a method of prevention of introduction of infectious disease into a community. But it is around preventing those and preventing transmission and isolating those who don't actually have illness.
Social distancing?
Social distancing is actually trying to create spaces so as to limit the possibility for transmission. So we know that when we have diseases such as COVID-19 that actually require close contact with the respiratory droplets and secretions of a sick individual, to close contact with those respiratory secretions, the best thing that we can do, or certainly one of the effective measures, is to separate people such that any transmission is less likely to occur.
Gotcha. Stephen, let me bring you into this. There are many different authorities in this country that have many different powers to be right now. Local municipalities have powers, the province has powers, the federal government has powers. Figure it all out for us. Who's got what?
Well, in the context of a public health event or emergency like this one, we do have legal authorities, and there's quite a lot of powers that are vested within our chief medical officers and our ministers and leaders. What's important is in public health is ultimately local. So it means that it's really the local public health units, it's really people like Dr. Davila who are leading the charge and really are the public health heroes right now. She and her colleagues across the province have powers to order people into isolation if they have the virus or if there's a clear sense that they have something like it. They also have a variety of other orders, like the ability to order sanitation of a site, as well as to gear up and call on a whole bunch of other resources as they need. But of course, as we know, cities and local units and regional public health units are actually creatures of the province. And in our constitution in Canada, it's very clear that healthcare is within the realm of the provincial government. So a lot of the authorities are then created at that level because that's where a lot of what will happen when people are sick and interfacing with the healthcare system, it's really at the provincial level. But in the context of public health, which is broader than healthcare, it actually is a shared responsibility under our constitution, shared between provinces and the federal government. And so in that respect, when we think of the kind of powers that different actors have, it's very much dependent on legislation that's been created by our parliament as well as our provincial parliament here in Toronto. The one place where the federal government has the sole discretion and sole authorities is around what happens at the border. So there's a lot of talk in the news media right now about people coming in and out. That is federal government jurisdiction, and that's where the Quarantine Act comes into play.
Okay, just to be clear then again, the feds can shut down the borders, but she can shut down the city? And Christine Elliott can shut down the province?
Well, I wouldn't say shut down. So, all powers need to be exercised in a way that minimally impairs the rights of Canadians, and that's proportionate to the risk that's involved. So the exact circumstances under which, for example, a local chief medical officer or the provincial chief medical officer of health would have these authorities would be prescribed in the legislation, but all of those powers are subject to limits that are described in the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And when it comes to public health, quite a bit of the things we might ask of people do actually infringe on rights, right? Like the right to liberty. So quarantine is essentially asking people to not engage with the rest of their community for the benefit of everyone, but it's limiting their right to liberty. But that's okay, even under the Canadian Charter of Rights.
Reasonable infringement on their rights.
But it only is okay if it's reasonable, if it's proportionate to the risk involved, and if we do it in a way that minimally impairs that right.
Just quick follow-up with you. Have you had meetings with provincial and federal officials so that everybody knows who's got what authority to do what, and you're all on the same page?
Yes, and
You've
I mean,
discussed this.
absolutely, and this is a regular conversation that we have. Again, remember, infectious disease management isn't just in the context of global outbreaks. It happens on a daily basis.
It's become more acceptable to have fare evasion than as a behavioral trait. So I think this is less about the fares and more about the behavior. And I just have to say this, what I'm seeing from our riders is that there's a sense of fairness, maybe a different principle to what Jay is talking about equity more, but fairness, equity, whichever you would like to call it, other riders feel it's not appropriate that some people aren't paying. And I think when that behavior starts to change, then we are on a better platform to think about any other changes we need to make.
Jay.
What I think is deeply inappropriate is that we live in a city that is so expensive and so that lacks so much affordability that people are having to choose between food and public transit fare at the end of the month. So the behavior that we're talking about is actually desperation, and it's out of survival, food or mobility. These things are human rights. And when you put people in a position where they have to choose between those types of things, they don't make, respectable behavioral choices.
Let me raise another issue here that is perhaps just as uncomfortable as the one we've been talking about. And Sheila, I'll go to you on this. Do you have any evidence that when the inspectors go on the trains or the streetcars or buses or whatever, and they are looking for possible fare evaders, do you know whether any racial profiling is going on?
Yes, and this is, we hear stories from people, and there is evidence right here in Toronto and from systems all across North America that fare enforcement disproportionately targets Black people and people of color, and that Black people and people of color also face harsher penalties for fare evasion. The Toronto Star uncovered that the TTC had been involved in carding on the TTC. 20% of the cards that were filled out were for Black riders. So we know that this is a problem, and it's not this problem is not going to go away by hiring more fare enforcement officers. We need to be making transit more affordable.
What do we know about this, Sean?
Well, we have lots of evidence and stories of people, of being kind of unfairly targeted. I think of it, like, what if you got into your car every day, your Mazda 3 or whatever, and a little voice comes on and says, "Greetings, you criminal." Like this assumption that you are doing something wrong. And I think that's where a lot of the rage comes from people who pay their fare every day and have never fare evaded and are seeing this kind of treatment. And this is where I think the behavioral change has to come from the institutions, not necessarily the riders. Make this thing friendly and respectful to all the riders.
What are you hearing about racial profiling, Jay?
We know that there's a tremendous degree of not only racial profiling, but class-based profiling as well. And I think that when we're talking about the kinds of enforcement that we're looking at, those two things are inseparable almost, both racial and class-based profiling, and also profiling of individuals with mental health issues or individuals who seem vulnerable or who look out of place. And this is why an enforcement model versus a model that promotes equity and access for all is truly problematic. It's so profoundly dangerous.
Phil.
So our revenue protection officers, just to your point, are very respectful. And I think you're absolutely right. It's part of doing fair revenue protection is part of the customer service you offer.
Friend, so you were saying that your officers are very respectful. Have you seen them enact enforcement on racialized or vulnerable peoples before?
I absolutely do. When I travel and I see them, I often walk with them. I often stop and talk to customers themselves directly. And I travel all the time. And I think we need to put, I still think the points you make, all of the points you make are 100% on the mark. It is from within the organization. And what we do, and the best way to deal with this from within your organization is to actively have an inclusive and diverse recruitment strategy so that your revenue protection officers, your frontline people reflect the demographics, the society they work in. And we have that.
it seems that every president, from Clinton to Bush to Obama and now Trump, has promised a more modest American foreign policy, and yet it never really seems to happen. The international entanglements continue. How come?
Well, again, I think it's partly because we were in this position to do it, but also because our foreign policy establishment has become accustomed to trying to run the world. And the central theme of the book, in fact, is that this foreign policy elite actually likes trying to shape the world as much as possible and tends to be overconfident about America's ability to transform other societies. So you're exactly right. Remember that Bill Clinton ran for president saying that it was the economy, stupid, and George W. Bush promised a humble foreign policy, and of course Barack Obama said that he would end foreign wars and concentrate on nation building at home. Yet none of these presidents were able to reverse course in any significant way, and the United States remained overcommitted in projects that weren't working particularly well.
Shannon Stein, is it time for a more modest, more restrained American foreign policy?
You know, I actually think it is, and I think it is because the world is no longer unipolar. China is already a great power, and in another few years, its economy may well be larger than the United States in purchasing power capacity. But the reason the United States has done what it has done is not quite as benign, I think, as you suggest, Steve.
Which Steve are you referring to there?
Walt.
Okay, gotcha.
That's right, sorry. Global markets benefited the United States enormously. Yes, the United States paid a price, but the advantage to the American economy, the growth of its technology companies, depends on widespread access to global markets, and that has been a strong driver in U.S. foreign policy. Second reason that this kind of behavior has really continued way past its best due date is it's almost impossible to get legislation through Congress that has significant domestic benefit. It is so polarized, so divided. So U.S. presidents, one and all, when they're frustrated by their inability to build infrastructure, to improve the American education system, turn to foreign policy because they are freer of constraint when they're doing that.
Hussein Ibish, how about you? Does America need a more restrained foreign policy these days?
More restrained than what is the question? So
Right.
let me just say, I think both of my colleagues here have made very good points, and I agree with much of what both of them have said. But I would differ a bit from Professor Walt in the sense that I don't see this as a homogenous problem. I see it as a problem of extremes. And I don't see it as a post-Cold War problem as much as a post-9/11 problem. In other words, I think if you look at American foreign policy, before 9/11, between the end of the Cold War and 9/11, you see a lot of international engagement, and the application of force in Kuwait, in the Balkans, et cetera, and a lot of robust diplomacy and a big international presence and military machine, but not an unrestrained foreign policy. It doesn't look like the foreign policy Professor Walt described in terms of trying to reshape foreign societies in our image or trying to impose democracy and free markets and all that. I mean, there's an encouragement of it, but that was not the point of the interventions in Kosovo or in Kuwait or anything like that. All right, now, you switch to post 9/11, and you do see that, this incredibly hubristic, bizarre overreaction of the invasion of Iraq and the nation-building, state-building projects that were quixotic and doomed to failure from the outset in Iraq and Afghanistan and beyond. Now, under second-term Obama and second-term and first-term Trump, I think we've seen a swing in the opposite direction where we maintain this huge military presence, but at least in the Middle East and in the Islamic world, there's a real reticence to get involved. And I think if you look at the reaction of second-term Obama and Trump to Syria, you see a kind of a phobia of getting involved at all, and a willingness to just give the store away to minor players or second-tier players like Russia, and as a result of this, for example, the United States is no longer the central diplomatic player in the Middle East, despite this enormous military and economic presence. Russia is the key player. Why? Because Russia asserts itself, and I think there is a sweet spot.
And that's just some of what we covered this week on the agenda. For more, including the full versions of those conversations, you can always visit our website. That's tvo.org, our YouTube channel at youtube.com/theagenda, or our Twitter feed at twitter.com/theagenda.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario. CPA Ontario is a regulator, an educator, a thought leader, and an advocate. We protect the public. We advance our profession. We guide our CPAs. We are CPA Ontario. And by viewers like you. Thank you.